We're going to jump into our presentation. I'm delighted that we have a guest here with us this evening to help us out with this. You know, Bridget, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name, and I don't want to chop it. So why don't you unmute and tell me your name?
No worries. It's funky looking. It's Geraghty.
Thank you. Excellent. Bridget Geraghty, who is a special education advocate, non-attorney, who works with Belkowitz Law. Bridget most recently was a special education teacher in FCPS. She worked with elementary school students as a learning disabilities teacher and a multi-disabilities teacher. Bridget attended St. Louis University, where she received a Bachelor of Arts in Elementary Education and was awarded a master's degree in special ed from George Washington University. Her master's degree focused on students with emotional and behavioral disabilities, and her contact information is also listed. It will be in the slideshow, and it's also listed on our agenda as well. I'll be chiming in and helping Bridget out with her presentation tonight. And just briefly, my background is that I'm also a former special education teacher. I was a learning disabilities teacher in Alexandria City and at the Catherine Thomas School. And then I went back to school for social work, and I was a school social worker at the Catherine Thomas School for many years. So and then I've been a mom to 3 twice exceptional kids. So I've done many, many years at the IEP table in a variety of different seats. So I'm really excited to be getting to chime in with Bridget and her presentation this evening. And bear with us if we have technical snafus, but those of you who come to our meetings all the time know that that's just part of our routine. So here we go. Bridget, if you want to unmute.
Okay. All right.
And I'm going to get you.
Remember how to do this.
I'm going to get you spotlit too.
Oh, wow. That's.
I know.
Very close up. Sorry, everyone. Let's see.
And if you need coaching, Amanda will help us out. And there she is. You got it.
Did I get it?
You sure did. Look at that.
Great. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to go over the ABCs of IEPs. There's a lot that parents and guardians really need to be aware of when they're going into IEP meetings. All these meetings can be overwhelming, and I just want to walk you through. Michelle gave me a really great introduction. I work as a special education advocate now with Belkowitz Law. I am not an attorney. I wish I had the attorney brain. I am a former special ed teacher, but I still hold my licensure. And again, I'll have my contact info at the end if you have any questions that I don't answer during the presentation. Here we go. So here are the goals for our presentation. First of all, I want you to be prepared for the meeting and feel organized, because I think we all know that special education has lots and lots of paperwork. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I want you to know your rights as a parent, and as students with disabilities, what their rights are. Third, to understand the expectations for the meetings. And I'll kind of explain, you know, I have that unique perspective being a former FCPS employee. So I know the kind of routine of how they go through their meetings. And then finally, I want you to feel confident advocating for your child. Because, and I stole this from Sherry's slideshow before, this is wonderful. You are your child's strongest advocate. So I want you to feel confident speaking up, asking questions. There's a lot going on. Don't be afraid to speak up during those moments in the meetings. So the special education maze, it is very complicated. If you have gotten to the IEP part, you have already gone through some of the most complicated portions, which include local screening committee and the eligibility meeting, and we've talked about evaluations. Your child has qualified under one of the many categories to receive services. Along the way, in preparation, there are many helpful handbooks that FCPS provides, and then there are some like the Purple Book that give you different regulations. I have to put together a handout that will have hyperlinks. Yes, that's the purple book. It's wonderful. I also, so in the handout, I'll have hyperlinks to these different things. And for the purple book, it's most up to date, which is wonderful. So really, you want to organize your child's records. Again, lots of paperwork. There are many different documents going on. I'll have a link to a previous SEPTA presentation about how to create a binder for your student, for your child who is a student. I would, there are different ways of doing these binders. I personally would, from my perspective, I would put everything in each year. With tabs for the evaluations and work samples and everything, so that you're only carrying one binder with you to a meeting, because you definitely don't want to be carrying a whole bunch of things. But right now we're going through the virtual world where most meetings are still virtual, so that is helpful. There are many laws that protect students with disabilities. These are the three most important ones to know about: Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. These all provide different levels of protection for students. Some of them have to do with funding, and then ADA is prohibiting discrimination on the basis of a disability. So prior to the IEP meeting, there are some things to be aware of. You should receive a handful of different papers. So now with the virtual world, you may receive the PDFs in an email. Before, you would probably get a large manila envelope stuffed with different papers. So in Virginia, if there is a draft created prior to the meeting, the school is required to give that to you 2 business days prior to the meeting. That is very helpful for you to go through and review and take notes, so you know what questions to ask, what to question, what you want to add. The procedural safeguards is the really thick white book. If you have a child that's been in special ed for a while, you may be able to build a huge wall with these, because they send them home with everything. Extended school year information, which is the ESY. Later, I'll talk about that, and that is not just the summertime. There will also be a meeting invite with list of participants. Hopefully, they send that out to you days in advance so that you are prepared and you are able to attend. One thing that is helpful to know, and I know this since I worked in FCPS, if a school feels that there is a potential for a disagreement or possibly could become contentious, they will always ask the procedural support liaison or the PSL to attend the meeting. That's kind of the safety net. Don't be alarmed if this person comes, but just know that there might be something afoot that's coming in the meeting. Diploma options, they're constantly changing. They change almost every year, so I would not be super concerned unless you have a student who is in high school. And then the agenda. During this presentation, I'm going to kind of go through the agenda, but I'm going to go through it from the perspective of an FCPS employee using C-STARS, which C-STARS is the IEP program that FCP uses.
And I'll just chime in here on the draft of the IEP coming to you prior to the meeting. That is a new law. Many of the schools have been sending it to parents ahead of time as a courtesy, but now it's actually in code that parents need to be given a draft, if one is written, at least 2 business days before the meeting. So you can always send a note to your team saying, I'm looking forward to getting a copy of any draft that you might be sending 2 days before the meeting. And send that more than 2 days before the meeting.
Yes, and in FCPS, the best practices is 5 days. I didn't see that happen very often, but it's good to know. Thank you for adding that, Michelle. All right. So before the meeting too, it's really important that you provide some input. You're the parent. You know your child best. They have a specific form with FCPS that you can fill out. I would recommend that whatever you provide them, that they document it on the plot page or present level of performance. we'll get to that later. I would let the school know if you plan to record, or if you're bringing additional people. You are able to do both. And probably one of the things that I really would stress as a special ed teacher, is to include your child. This is a legal document that is specific to your child. It's individualized for your child. Ask your child, what are your strengths? What are your interests? What do you think you need to work on? What do you think would be helpful? Oh, Michelle, yeah, let me know when you're ready.
I have a special guest visitor. This is my daughter, who is 14 and in 9th grade. And she has been coming to her IEP meetings since she was in kindergarten. So for a couple of the slides where we're going to be talking about including your child, she's going to just make a couple of comments to go with that. So in terms of including your child before the meeting, this is the before the meeting slide. Have a conversation with your child about what's easy for them and what's hard for them in school, especially when they're younger, because we're not going to expect young kids to be able to be talking about their strengths and weaknesses and what their profile looks like. But you can certainly ask your child and write down their answer ahead of time in case they get nervous. What's easy for you at school? What's hard for you at school? I often like to ask kids, if you could wave a magic wand and change anything, what would you change? Because that really usually gives you a nice little glimpse of what's challenging for your child. Go ahead with your next slides, Bridget, and then we'll, oh yeah.
Also with the sheet.
Oh, the one pager?
Yeah, it does help to do it early since those are hard things to fill out.
Oh.
Like I just remember in 6th grade just being like so annoyed with it. And it's just nice to just have some prior experience, but it is helpful. It is helpful.
Yep. And that one pager is from I'm Determined.
You don't have time to
Yes, thank you. And I, again, that will be another link. I'm Determined is a great program. I really look into it. If, again, not only for the one pager, but it has a lot of great resources. So preparing for the meeting, again, you have all those documents that are going to be organized beautifully in your binder, right? It's best to sit down and think, what concerns do you have about your child? How can you back that up with evidence? And what are some appropriate requests that you can make during the meeting? So these are some great examples. One, your child spends 3 hours on homework and your child's in 3rd grade. That's not appropriate. Homework should not take that long. And you can look at the homework log. You can look at, is your child even completing the assignment in that amount of time? So you might want to think, is there an underlying issue? Do we need to assess for a reading disability? Or for any type of math disability? Do we need to have extended time? These are all great things to think about. And again, when you come to the IEP meeting, it's supposed to be a collaborative thing. It's supposed to be collaborative. Everybody's supposed to be working together. So, it's great to, if you don't know the answer, ask the team. Maybe somebody else will have some ideas to build off of yours. And then we're going to get into the members of the IEP team. So there are certain required members of the IEP team, and then there are some additional members of the IEP team. The parents are a definite required member. One thing to consider, if you and your partner are divorced, you want to consider who is going to be making those educational decisions and be on the same page. That can be really difficult. You must have a general education teacher who has worked with the student, not some random teacher from the building who's never met your child and who has no idea what the curriculum is in the grade that your child is in. It would not make any sense to have a kindergarten teacher for a 4th grade IEP if they, one, don't know that curriculum and they've never met your child. A special education teacher, which is usually the case manager for the student, because they know your child best. They're the ones that are writing the goals and work with your child on a more a daily basis. Hope sometimes depends on services. You also want someone who represents the district who is qualified to speak about special education services, general education curriculum, and the different resources available in the district. Oftentimes, this person is labeled as the principal designee. And in a lot of meetings, I notice it's usually an administrator in the school. It doesn't have to be an administrator though, but it typically is. Another person that is in the meeting should be an individual who can interpret the evaluations. Again, very helpful if they've met your child. If they are the ones that conducted the evaluation, that's even better because they can provide those observational details that can be helpful. And then again, there are other people who are available, sometimes related service providers. And on the next slide, I'll get into some other people you may want to consider because there are so many people working in the school district that can be helpful. And then whenever appropriate, again, preschool are probably not going to be, very excited and helpful in the IEP meeting, but for Michelle, her daughter has gone to meetings and can kind of fill us in. I'm so excited you're joining us. Thank you.
So, and actually the idea of even bringing a preschooler, yeah, I agree. I mean, I did not bring my kids when they were in preschool, but I did bring a picture of them because to me, it was really important that all the people sitting around the table had a face to go with the name that was being talked about. I do see that some people are putting questions in the chat. We're going to put back up in a moment the link for the Google form so that we can just capture all of your questions. And before I ask Aviva a couple of questions, I do just want to say there was a question about, can the school evaluate your child for a reading disability? Yes, and what we're talking about tonight is the IEP, which is what comes after the evaluation and after your child has been found eligible for special education services. We could do an entire workshop on the eligibility process. And we actually have on our YouTube channel a previous speaker who talked all about doing assessments. So tonight is just on the actual IEP, not on the whole process that comes before the IEP. But the short answer is yes. All right, so in terms of bringing your child to the meeting, when you were younger, like in elementary school, what do you remember briefly about what the meetings were like for you coming to those meetings?
I just remember just feeling a bit impatient, to be honest. Spinny chairs was fun.
Spinning in the chairs.
As a young child, spinny chairs were fun. Felt very important.
Yes, and actually I'm glad you said that. You felt important.
Yeah.
Something that I always would frame to my kids is that we're sitting down at the table with a lot of people and they're going to be on your team. And so her name's Aviva. So I referred to them as Team Aviva. And all through elementary school especially, we referred to our special ed team by team, fill in the blank child. Did you come to the home meetings when you were younger?
Definitely not.
Definitely not. You came and
certain amount of time, gave my input about this would be helpful. No, this probably wouldn't be helpful. This would be nice. And only probably this year I've gone to the whole meeting.
No, middle school, and even elementary school.
I guess, but yeah.
But in earlier elementary school, it was really, you would come in and I would say the same things that I asked you the night before. What's easy for you? What's hard for you? What would you change if you had a magic wand? And you would sit in the spinny chair feeling important.
You got to sign the paper.
Yes.
You got to sign the paper.
And you got to sign the paper. And for a kid, that really is a big deal. And it gives them a sense of ownership because they're signing the attendance sheet that they attended their meeting.
Also, another thing about the whole team thing, it's really nice to be able to see all these people just by knowing that, hey, these are people that care about you, that are here for you. Also, it's kind of helpful to know, hey, these aren't your teachers, but you could go to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's good for kids to know that all these people are there. I start bringing my daughter in kindergarten, and she received services since infant toddler connection for speech when she was very little.
I hope that you tutor kids.
So I definitely, I have 3 kids who all had IEPs since preschool, and I brought them all starting in kindergarten. The other advantage to that was that my kids were always aware that they had an IEP. They were aware that people were there watching out for them. And they were aware about the lingo of their disability, especially as they got older. Now we're at the point where Aviva's in 9th grade and she comes to the meetings and she could just completely self-advocate for herself and talk about her areas of strength and weakness, using the correct terminology. She's comfortable sitting at the table, and then that helps her when she goes off to college to be able to advocate for what kind of accommodations she's going to need when she no longer is sitting next to a parent.
Also, knowing the accommodations is really helpful, because if you're not getting something, like, you could be getting that if you know that you have it. Like, it's really important to know that I have this option, which comes in handy when you need it, but you don't know that you have it.
Right, right. Knowing what's going on and what's supposed to be happening is also
Yeah.
really important in terms of self-advocacy. And you didn't know it as much when you were in early elementary school,
Yeah.
but as you got older, we talked about it more with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, and I think, it's really, I love hearing from a student's perspective, because she, again, that self-advocacy piece for building confidence. And really our goal is for your child to become independent. Hopefully doesn't need to have the IEP forever. We want to build and upon those skills. So that's great. I'm glad she could join us. Some other members to consider. There are so many, like I said, so many people in Fairfax County. You might want to think of assistive technology, the behavior intervention teacher, dyslexia specialist, twice exceptional or AEP teacher. If your child, if English is second language, have the ESOL teacher come. They can really give you great information as far as language acquisition and where your child is, based on different data from WIDA scores and things like that. Curriculum specialists, especially the special ed curriculum specialists, can give you more information on the different reading and math and writing programs that are available. Counselor, transportation, and an interpreter. And this one I kind of want to explain too. A lot of times we have parents who speak multiple languages. There are so many people in Fairfax County from all different backgrounds. A lot of times parents, they may seem that they can understand and speak English very fluently and clearly, but you really have to consider all the translating that is going on in that person's brain. And sometimes it is very helpful to have an interpreter who can relay information for you or explain it on a different level. So that's something you may want to consider if you do speak multiple languages. It's nothing to be concerned about. I would definitely ask the team. And really, they should kind of be aware and asking and reaching out to you. But again, the self-advocacy piece, it's for everybody, really. So this is a funky looking screen. When we're going through the agenda in a meeting, this is a screenshot of what C-STARS, which is the IEP program, what it looks like. And I can tell you as a special ed teacher, the thing that you need to really look at is underneath the blacked out portions, there are certain tabs. It says cover, transition, plop, needs and accommodations. That is the order of the IEP meeting. So you may be on the plop page and start talking about testing and you want certain accommodations for your child. And the members of the school-based members of the team are gonna be like, we're getting to that. This is so you understand they're going by those tabs. There's a place for everything, and they can jump around from different tabs, but this is kind of the flow of how the meeting goes. So one of the first tabs is transition. And this is something that's for students 14 and older, and it's to work on that, preparing for further education, employment, and independent living. If you are in that fit, if you have a student that's at that age, you really want to consider if there is something that they're really interested in that they want to pursue. Let's say they are interested in teaching. How can they, what do they need to focus on? What classes should they focus on? Do they want to be an engineer? Are they getting all their math credits? Are they taking advanced math or other electives that can be really supportive of that? We want to, it's a building block and we want to build them up for that success later in life. The next tab going over, so we talked about transition. The next one is the plop. So you'll hear everyone talk about the plop, the plop, the plop. It's the present levels of academic performance. And it really needs to focus on the progress that your child is making in the curriculum, but it's not just academically, it's the behavior, social. Any area of need is going to become a goal. The plop is going to be where you're going to have your test scores, which is evaluations that are done by Fairfax County, or if you do an independent evaluation, which I will get to later. I want you to think about anything with discipline, behavior, challenges at home with homework. There are a lot of things that need to go in this. So the last point says to avoid the parent input section. And the reason I have that, I know there is the parent input form that I said to make sure is included on the plop. In a meeting, the school-based members are going to hold on to pieces of information that you say. If during the meeting you are really concerned about your child's reading, if in the meeting you say, oh, Miss So-and-so, thank you so much for everything you're doing for little Johnny and his reading. I noticed this is helpful and everything. You can bet that they're going to put that in the parent input section of the plop. Anything positive that you say, any thank yous, and parents have the best intentions in thanking staff, and teachers work really hard. They're thankful, but it can definitely kind of take away from any concerns that you have, because later on, when someone else picks up the IEP, if you say, I've been really worried about Johnny's reading for years, they can say, it says here you thank the teacher and says she was doing such a great job. So that's something to really think about. And, I think, again, parents are polite and so excited. Really try to monitor exactly what you say, because it's going to be documented in a specific way. Moving on to the next tab. So we did transition, plop. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Speaking of input being documented, I don't recall, I'm sorry, if there's going to be a slide mentioning about recording meetings.
Oh, yes.
But,
so towards the beginning, I talked about how you want to let the school know if you're recording or if you're bringing additional members. Yes, you are able to record a meeting. Yeah.
Always record your meetings.
And yeah, I would, that is, I would do that as well.
And you can even say as a parent, this is something that I just do as a matter of routine so that I can go back and listen to it later. But always record your meetings, and you can just do it on your phone or on your laptop. You can just do a voice recorder.
Yeah. And if you tell the school that you're going to be recording, they're probably going to record too. So you can always ask them for a copy. Thank you for pointing that out. So moving on to the next tab, we're going to talk about the goals. So this is where we're going to focus on the strengths and needs of your child. And then we're also going to slide into the accommodations. So in the section of this section of the IEP, we're going to talk about the strengths and needs, and that for every need, there has to be a goal. There must be data. I cannot tell you how many IEPs that I see where there is not a substantial amount of data. There's a lot of observations, but there's no baseline. We need to know if there is a goal that we're working on, where are we starting from and what are we building to? We have to know the beginning to know if the goal is going to be appropriate or not. So here's an example of what it looks like on paper. Of course, on C-STARS, it's going to look a little different, but we have the area of need, and then it says the present level of performance. This is a different plop from the big plop page. This is where I'm going to be talking about the strengths and needs section. This is an example of a bad strengths and needs section. So let's say it's an area in writing, and I can tell you that I took these directly from an IEP that I had, I think, last week. So here, the area is writing. Think about all of the things that we can talk about in writing, all of the data, the different rubrics that are used in writing, looking at the educational evaluation. How did your student do on the KTEA and the writing subtests? This is very weak. It says, based on teacher observations in classwork, the student is able to compose sentence independently and use punctuation with about 90% accuracy. About, are they not sure? That's troubling. Then on the needs section, based on teacher observations in classwork, again, the student struggles to use casing when writing sentences. The student struggles to begin writing and has difficulty writing sentences on the same topic. That's not even a coherent sentence. How can we fix it? Sorry. Again, a former teacher, I love going through these and it's like a red pen, fix that. And two, I was the lead teacher at my school. So it was kind of more of a, almost a little administrative, where I am helping all the other teachers out. So yeah, I get really irritated when I see things like this, because this is not helpful.
Yeah, your strengths and needs should include concrete data. It should say they scored at this % on this skill this many times, or on these dates. It should be much more specific than this. Much more specific. And two, when we're talking about the strengths and needs, when we get to the goal, everything here is talking about composing sentences and punctuation and casing. The goal should be related to that. We don't want to have a goal that's talking about adding details, because we don't have any data on that. It's not what we were talking about earlier. Another bad example, a lot of the behavior improvement goals and areas of need, this is where I tend to see a lot of observational data and not a lot of concrete data that we can really get our hands on and have that baseline. Yay, the student's bright and full of energy. They're really reaching to get some positive strengths in there for your child. Able to focus with prompting. How often is the student being prompted? 5 or more prompts every 10 minutes. Still, how often are you collecting data? What does this look like? What kind of prompts is the student getting? So this later on, it says the student will sometimes rush work and subsequently submit subpar work. What is subpar work? What does that look like? How are you measuring if it's subpar? There are a lot of questions here, a lot of things that we really could have more solid data on. So again, that was, and I'm going to be pointing at my screen. You can't see what I'm pointing at. That's the present level of performance. We just went through the strengths and needs. Now let's get to the goals. So the goals need to be measurable. This is from the Virginia regulations, what we're looking for. And really there are a lot of requirements, what the student can reasonably be expected to accomplish. They must be based upon the unique needs of the student. There are a lot of times there are goals that you can tell were copy and pasted from another student. And I have sometimes seen that where they don't even change the name, which is, that's not good. Goal for at least every area of need, a clear statement of how progress will be monitored, and when periodic reports on progress will be provided. And in Fairfax County, that's the progress report that usually comes home every quarter with the report card. It should be coming with the report card in the big manila envelope. This was a very important case of not too long ago, 2017, Andrew. Schools must offer an IEP that is reasonably calculated to enable a child to make make progress appropriate, and it needs to be appropriately ambitious. And we'll kind of get into that when when I'm going over some of the different goals. So when you're writing an IEP goal, we want it to be SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time limited. Again, it needs to be unique to your child, and we're writing these goals with keeping in mind that this should be mastered within a year. So again, we want it to be appropriately ambitious.
We don't want something where the previous year they worked on math facts of addition, one single digits going up to 20. And then the next year working on addition of single digits going up to 30. We want to make it appropriately ambitious. Now that might be appropriate for some students, but if we're talking about our typical LD student, we're going to expect more within a year to make progress. There are lots of different goal banks that are online. This is a great website. Different disability organizations will have goal banks, especially if we're looking at dyslexia, which is still the big thing we're hearing about. And then there's an app even on your phone that you can get to look at different things. Okay, so let's take a look. Is this a SMART goal? So behavior improvement. I want you to take a look and think about it. Is this SMART? Is this measurable? Another thing to think about with these goals and with the entire IEP, if you move, you want to do the stranger test. If a stranger picked this up, if you moved tomorrow and went to Missouri, would the teacher pick it up and know what they're supposed to do, what they're monitoring, what they're measuring? So it really needs to be specific. For this one, the thing that there are a lot of things that get to me, but one of those is with acceptable quality. What is acceptable quality? Another thing we see often is we'll finish the paper appropriately. What does that look like? It needs to be objective and measurable, and something that is really helpful in figuring out if a goal is SMART. How would you monitor it? What tool would you use to ensure that you're measuring it? This next one, we'll use school provided to record assignments for, oh, I've got this little window blocking. To record assignments for all classes in order to turn in 4 out of 5 assignments. This isn't, the way it's being recorded, it has nothing to do with what's really going on. Michelle, I know this is one you provided me if you want to kind of go into it.
Sure. For example, the student needed to work on study skills on turning in assignments on time. But then they listed as the weakness that the student as the need that they will write down their assignments in order to turn their work in on time. And the question is, what are you measuring at that point? Are you measuring that they're using their planner, or are you measuring that they're turning their work in on time? Like, what are you trying to get at with that? And then pick what piece you're trying to get at, and that's what you focus on. So if the goal was that, which in this case I think it was, if I remember correctly, was to be actually using your planner, then you just write the goal as that they're going to use their planner, and you're going to do random checks 10 times over a 1-month period, and they need to be writing down their assignments with 80% accuracy. If you want to see if the kid's writing down their assignments, you don't measure it by seeing if they turned in their work. 2 different things.
Yeah, thank you. And I think too, another thing that we see often is 4 out of 5 opportunities, 4 out of 5 assignments. Hopefully they're getting a lot more exposure than just 5 opportunities each quarter. And are they randomly picking 5 random opportunities and 4 of those happen to be mastering the goal? So, I would really, in meetings that I go to, I often recommend doing 4 out of 5 consecutive probes, or 80% of all opportunities. You want to make sure that nothing's being cherry picked, that it really is an accurate picture of your child throughout the entire quarter. That's another reason I don't like to see with an average, because let's say the student does great on 4 of them, and then the 5th one bombs. That again, I don't see mastery there if it's not consecutively, if it's up and down. Okay. Ooh, another one. This is a writing one, and just looking at it, it is very overwhelming. There are so many things that are being monitored, right? It's overwhelming. It's written in a very confusing manner. And one thing to consider, there are annual goals. You can create short-term objectives. And if you have a child that's on the VAP route, they should have short-term objectives. But it can be for any student. So this is something where I would consider breaking it up and focusing on one thing at a time. And those short-term objectives or benchmarks can be done where it's building up. So, your overall goal, you want the student to achieve 80%, could start with, or let's say 100%, you start with 80, then get to 90, can be like that. Or it can be broken down by little skills that they're working on throughout the quarter.
And
this reading decoding,
the piece on that one that always makes me laugh is the B+.
Yeah.
Depending on the subject that you're talking about, if it's writing here, like a B+ could end up being a little bit subjective. You really want it to be measuring something accurately and specifically.
Absolutely. Yeah, and reading decoding, sorry, these are ones that just kill me. Student will read sight words with 80% accuracy on 3 out of 4 opportunities quarterly. I can't tell you how many times I see this goal, countless times. What kind of sight words are we talking about? Are we talking about pre-primer? Are we using Dolch? Are we using Fry? If we're working on decoding, how is the student doing with decoding? Can they do consonant, vowel, consonant? Can they do trigraphs? Can they do multisyllabic words? So there's a lot of issues there. And again, we've got that 3 out of 4 opportunities. I would suggest the 3 out of 4 consecutive probes. So we've gone through the strengths and needs, goals, and now I kind of want to focus on how progress is measured. And you can see it in that little tiny box in the bottom right-hand corner. This is what we're going to be talking about.
Oh, you know what, Bridget?
Oh, yep.
This one that you have up right there was actually an example of a really well-written goal. Would you just read the annual goal?
Yeah, of course. Given a list of 15 to 20 single and multisyllabic words and pseudo words containing taught phonemes, the student will use learned decoding strategies, so syllabication, self-monitoring, self-correcting morphology to read the words with 90% accuracy on 3 out of 4 opportunities measured quarterly. That is beautiful. I like that one much better than the previous one.
Exactly.
So 2, we're going to be monitoring and measuring progress in certain ways. Now, you are not limited by what is, the little check marks on the C-STAR screen. So these are kind of the typical ones. I would really emphasize, again, we want things to be as objective as possible. If we're talking about a writing goal, is there a rubric we're following? Is this rubric individualized for your child, or is it just a random grade level rubric where it's not broken down into what we're looking at? We want to include the word written. If you were to ask for raw data, if it's something that's observational or technically, it doesn't have to be written down. If you were to ask for that, they could say, oh, well, I observed it. Do you have it written down? No. Well, they don't have to. That's why you want to include written. I would avoid homework. I really think that I don't think homework should be used to measure progress. That's something that's outside of school, and kids are really just exhausted by the time they get home. So I don't think I personally don't like using that. And consider using a student checklist. Again, this is your child's IEP is for them. They need to be included in the process if it's something that
इधर आता है कंप्यूटर पे बैठा हुआ है.
Am I going crazy? Okay, sorry, I'm just making sure I'm not completely listening.
No, you're fine.
You never know. I've got a 4-month-old and all the energy is out of me. So you might want to consider that. The teachers can work with your child to come up with something that's helpful for them. All right, so this is same tab, but below all of the goals and everything, that's when you're going to see the really long list of accommodations. So the purpose of the accommodations are to provide the student with equal access to their education, and equal opportunity to show what the student knows. It needs to be individualized. We want to document everything. We want these accommodations to be specific. And it does not limit course options. That's something that I think parents are concerned about. A student who is in honors or advanced math can have a calculator accommodation. That's okay. Again, we want it individualized for each student.
Something else I want to chime in on here on accommodations also. If your child has a 504 plan and not an IEP, the 504 plan, and again, we could do a whole other workshop on that, but the 504 plan covers the accommodations. So just, take note of this accommodations section if your kiddo has a 504 plan, because this all applies to that as well.
Here are some tips. I often see upon student request, if it's an accommodation, your child is required to have it. It's a requirement. They should have it. They shouldn't have to ask for their accommodations. If it's there, they should have it. AIM Virginia, this is something that a lot of schools, teachers totally gloss over. It's really a wonderful tool. It's free in the county, and it's accessible materials that, Michelle, do you want to chime in?
Well, I'm just going to chime in about that. I'm trying to remember what the acronym stands for. It's accessible instructional materials, I believe.
I believe so, yes.
And if your child, for example, has a reading disability, they are eligible then for in Virginia services. The teachers need to put in the paperwork to get access to it. But what that does is it gets your kiddo access to, for example, audiobooks, computer versions of printed books, so that if they need to just take notes on the computer, they can highlight or use the computer. They can then use programs like Read and Write, which it's a screen reader and it reads aloud for the student. All that is technological, and it's all through AIM Virginia.
Thank you. Yeah, and during the meeting, I would not worry about how to. If it's something your child needs, then the school has to figure out how to provide it for them. Again, we want to be specific, especially if we're talking about anything with behavior. That's one thing in particular. We want to be very specific. If we're using positive reinforcement, what does that look like? Again, if a stranger picks it up, they have to be able to follow it. And then we don't want to introduce any accommodations on end of the year assessment. So any accommodation that is used on an assessment, this child has to be familiar with it. I'm sorry, there goes my 4-month-old. It's her bedtime, sorry.
And babies, dogs, it's the world of Zoom. So yeah,
my husband
don't want your kid
running
using an accommodation
the
first time that you don't want them seeing it for the very first time when they're taking their SOL.
Exactly. So there's lots of examples, and there can be a lot of overlap depending on your child's needs. So this is a screenshot I took when I was teaching. I'm really glad I did. So this is what it looks like on the computer screen of C-STARS. And you may notice that when you're in the meeting, there's this huge list of accommodations and there's all these check boxes, and they don't go through each and every one. So you may not know what's all available. You are not limited to what's on this checklist. Again, if your child needs it, it needs to be in the IEP and they need to provide it. So I'm going to go into different areas of need and what some possible accommodations I would recommend. So auditory processing, and this includes phonological processing. There are so many different things that are helpful. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just the things I see most often. This is where you're going to see the read aloud, the AIM Virginia, the explicit and systematic instruction in phonics. That is extremely, extremely important. Checks for understanding, extra time. You're going to see a lot of overlap. If a student, again, this is something a lot of times students with dyslexia have auditory processing issues as well. Auditory processing is the ability to interpret sounds that are heard. And then the central auditory processing is your brain is identifying sounds and attaches meaning to them. And then phonological processing is the use of the sounds and language to process spoken and written words. So, you know, I give you that kind of background because you may think, oh, yeah, I noticed that when I'm talking to my child, she really has to take a lot of time to process what I'm saying. There may be an auditory processing issue. Since you've already gone through the eligibility process, I would take a look at that paperwork because it goes through and will document what some of the issues are. If you have a child with a learning disability, there's some type of processing deficit, and there's a whole, they will need a list, and it will show up in the psychological evaluation too. It's another great place to look to see what those deficits are. Visual processing. Oh my gosh, those sheets. How many of us had those growing up, those timed math sheets? Visual processing is the ability to perceive, analyze, then synthesize and think with visual patterns, and then to store and recall those representations. So for someone with, I think anyone would look at this and be overwhelmed, but especially for someone with visual processing, this is incredibly overwhelming for them. So these are some really helpful accommodations that I would recommend. One that I think is especially helpful is to reduce the visual clutter. That can be for worksheets. So for example, instead of a crazy worksheet like this, maybe there's much less and there's more white on the paper, so that the brain is able to process everything on that page and not get bogged down and overwhelmed trying to synthesize everything. And two, we want to make sure we're not copying from the board. Those are all sorts of things that you'll see with visual processing deficits. Short-term memory, which includes working memory. So short-term memory is the ability to remember and hold information immediately and then use it right away. Working memory, I would always explain it to my students that it's kind of like the math calculator in your head. It's the ability to hold information. So I'm thinking 7 + 3 in my head, but then being able to manipulate it. So I'm thinking in my head, I'm picturing it, I'm counting, I know it's 10. Working memory is a type of short-term memory. Different accommodations that I would recommend, there's visual cues, chunking of assignments, short, simple directions. One that's great, and it can overlap with so many different things, is having a student paraphrase directions back to ensure that they understand what they're supposed to do. And two, a calculator. Calculator accommodation is wonderful for those students who have working memory issues. It's going to typically affect them. We're going to see that really affects students in math a lot of times. That's where it usually comes up most.
Bridget, something is rubbing on your mic right there. Yep. Whatever that just was.
Papers and the tablecloth. Thank you for letting me know. Sorry, everyone. That's probably super annoying.
But that you mentioned before, but you can keep. Yeah, you can change the slide. It's fine. But that idea of having a calculator accommodation, you can have a calculator accommodation all the way through high school. So if you hear a teacher say, if you need a calculator accommodation, you don't belong in fill in the blank math, that is false.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, yeah.
I'm sure it happened. I don't know why I'm naive and like, oh my gosh,
Yes.
It has to happen.
In October, yes.
So another type of memory is the long-term retrieval, and that's being able to store information and retrieve it later on. So that's where we're going to see the repetition, immediate feedback, again, short, simple directions, having those paraphrased directions and visual cues, all very helpful for someone who has difficulties with long-term retrieval. Processing speed.
Another good one to throw in there for long-term retrieval and also working memory is a word bank. And I sort of picture like a word bank is essentially like a calculator for words. If your child has a hard time with retrieving and remembering words, and the test is not literally how do you spell the word, but it's like how do you use the word, then ask for a word bank, especially if it's not going to be multiple choice, so that the kid doesn't have to remember the words that may not be as familiar to them, but they need those words in order to apply their knowledge.
Excellent. Yeah. And then one with long-term retrieval, I want to, providing a list of steps, very helpful with math. We think of all these multi-step problems. A student may be able to do the calculation, do the steps, but can't remember the steps. So I've seen students who are in high school who have an accommodation where they have a list of steps for, PEMDAS, anything like that. It can be really helpful.
Or formula sheets also.
Formula sheets.
If the issue is that you need the formulas in order to apply the formulas to show that you understand it, then are you testing that the kid can remember the formulas, or do you want to see if they understand how to use them? So give them a formula sheet.
Then we have processing speed, and that's the ability to automatically perform usually relatively easy and learn tasks. And you have to have high attention and concentration to be able to do this. So a lot of these are not exhaustive lists. These are just ones I see most often. Reducing the quality, reduce the quantity of work in favor of quality, breaking large assignments down, chunking assignments, again, limit the copying activities, accuracy over speed. We might want to think about a scribe, voice to text, reduce paper and pencil, and wait time. That is really important for all students, but even if it's something that's offered to all students, if it is something your child requires, it needs to be documented.
On the idea too of breaking large assignments down, a really good piece to include in there is with due dates, preset due dates, especially if you have a child who is struggling with executive functioning and staying organized and on top of things. It's not only helping the kid learn how to break down large assignments, but holding them accountable to get them done.
Yeah. Again, the IEPs, they're not limited to academic things, sensory, emotional, behavioral. You may want to consider your child may have, sensory processing disorder or have anxiety, where a quiet lunch setting would be really helpful for them to access their education. We don't want any students breaking down. Access to sensory tools. There's lots of different sensory tools. There's fidgets. I've seen where schools put together a little toolbox is for students where they work with them to figure out what tools are helpful. And then they have that kit where the student can take with them to different rooms. Extra hallway, transition time, warning before transitions. That's especially very helpful for our friends with autism because those transitions are especially difficult for them. We want defined limits and expectations. Positive reinforcement system. Again, this goes back to being specific. What does that look like? Is it a token economy? What are we doing? What does it look like? If someone picks it up, can they do the same system that's being done currently?
And along that note, you can also have accommodations for sensory for things like we'll have advanced notice of fire drills, because for a lot of kids, that fire drill sets off their sensory system. It just kicks them into fight or flight. So if the child knows there's a fire drill coming, or you take them out a couple minutes before the fire drill, that can really help a lot of kids. And you can put that in the IEP.
Absolutely. And too, with we'll get sensory tools. Some kids really gum. It really helps calm kids down to have that where they're chewing and chewing. I know a lot of schools, we don't allow gum in the school. Again, if your child requires it to access his or her education, it needs to be documented in the IEP. Safe space or calm space, that's really helpful for a lot of kids to have a place where they can go and calm down, maybe have some visuals there for calming strategies, and frequent breaks. Again, we want to build in that self-advocacy piece. We want students to be able to learn when they need a break, but sometimes it needs to be teacher directed at first until a student really starts to learn that. Food allergies, this is something we're seeing more and more. These are just a few. And, I think there are a lot of examples that I've been just talking with a coworker that I would have never thought about. Things like if there are tissues that have lotion. What if it had, it could have shea butter in the lotion. If it's a child who has a nut allergy, that's going to be a problem. If we have, there are a lot of students who have milk protein allergies. If someone is drinking milk at lunch and then they get milk on their hands and they touch the student, again, there are different degrees on how allergic a student is. If they're going to go into anaphylaxis, if a student has these severe allergies, it really, really needs to be documented, and there needs to be a healthcare plan that every staff member who interacts with your child has access to. Michelle, I don't know if you
absolutely. This is one of my areas of specialty. The food allergy fair, the food allergy research education group has some pages on their website now about IEP accommodations and emergency care plans, but you can absolutely have accommodations like classmates will wash their hands after they eat, especially when the kids are little, not having food at parties and celebrations. There are some schools that don't have food celebrations anymore, but we just had Valentine's Day, and I know my social media is full of parents writing horror stories about things that kids brought home from food celebrations. You can put that stuff in the IEP.
And I know Michelle touched on this earlier, executive functioning and attention. This is big with our students with ADHD and ADD. Have that organizational piece, huge, tracking things. We want to make sure we're checking for understanding. A lot of times I see preferential seating. What does that look like? Is the student closer to the board, proximity to the teacher? Are they away from the doorway where there's lots of commotion going up and down the hallway? So we want to make sure we're specific with that. Frequent breaks. One thing that I really like to use when I was a teacher is the stand while working. I think a lot of times different classrooms, teachers get very focused. They want all of their students sitting down and all doing the same thing and getting their work done. With our students who have difficulty with sitting still, they may be able to do all the work if they simply are able to stand or sit on the floor or have a pillow or something like that. We want to make sure we're giving them all the tools they need so they can access their education.
You can also have accommodations that deal with medical issues as well. So for example, one of my kids had sleep apnea and would fall asleep in class. And so he had an accommodation of standing in class. If he was getting sleepy, he could stand up in the back of the room so that he wasn't falling asleep at his desk. Also, if you have a child with sensory needs who perhaps doesn't get a lot of advance warning when they need to use the toilet, you can have an accommodation that the child will have like a flash pass or essentially immediate access to going to use the bathroom. That can be an accommodation. You don't want the kid who is not mastered or not able to sense toileting needs sitting there and waiting and raising their hand and raising their hand and raising their hand and then having an accident.
Right. Yeah, and you know, again, these are just some areas, like Michelle said, you can have accommodations, and again, it's what your child needs. It needs to be individualized. Dyslexia. So again, we're seeing I have a lot of clients who call looking for help specifically for dyslexia. Extended time is a huge one because of the amount of effort it takes students with dyslexia to write, to read. That is a very big one that I think is a lot of times overlooked. We want to take a look at any read aloud or online audio of directions, assignments. Again, AIM Virginia, wonderful. Explicit systematic phonics instruction. If you have a child with dyslexia, you really need to make sure that the county is using a program that is dyslexia approved. There aren't a lot that they will offer you, but that doesn't mean that they can't provide it. If your child requires that to make progress, your child requires that. They need to figure out how to give it to you. Scribed speech to text, something that I really, a lot of kids benefited from is having a personal word wall or book. Again, that repetition, pairing verbal and visual, spell check graphic organizer, and flexible testing. And again, a lot of overlap with some of the earlier things we talked about, but you may want to consider that to have multiple days of testing, because again, we don't want to overload a child who is spending a lot of effort to do the reading and the writing portion. They may know the information, they just need that extra support. So we spent a lot of time on needs and accommodations. We're going to move on to the E&M assess. So that's elementary and middle school assessments. So we're getting into the different types of testing. There's division statewide. So that's where we're going to look at the SOLs, VAP, iReady, DRA, which I heard that they may be phasing out. I don't know if that's true. I would love for that to be true. It is. Oh,
I believe that they're switching over to iReady, but some schools still use DRA. But Bridget, if you want to sort of briefly state about
sure
that accommodations apply to this, and then go on to some of the other slides too.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, so there's the calculator accommodation, read aloud. There are separate criteria forms that have to be filled out. This is what it looks like on the printed out form. Again, there's lots of checks, and that's all has to do with assessments. We're going to move on to, again, the test. I forgot to mention that there are a lot of testing accommodations, extended time, lots of different things like that. We're going to go into LRE, which is the least restrictive environment. So to the maximum extent, appropriate children with disabilities are to be with children who are non-disabled. We want to, again, there's a lot of inclusion is a big topic. There are some benefits to being with the gen ed, and some that are to be in the special ed setting. So you really have to kind of balance that. In being in the gen ed setting, you're going to have the modeling of the peer modeling, which is very helpful in a lot of cases. If you have a child who's very far behind in reading, it may be better to be in a small group environment when they're working on that skill. So you really have to consider that when you're looking at that. For placement is one of the options along the continuum. Location is the physical place where your child receives services. The placement and the location are not the same thing. This is what it looks like on the paper copy. They always love to completely read that to you, even though everyone can see it and read for themselves. And then they have to list when your child will participate with their same age peers.
Bridget, in going back, you don't have to change the slide, but when we spent all that time talking about accommodations, and you had originally shown the list of all the checkoff accommodations, there is a place that says other. And yes. So you can list and include any accommodation that your kid needs as an other. It doesn't have to be wedded to that list.
No. Those you can, whatever your child requires.
Yeah. All right, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. The next is the services. Again, just going down those tabs. That's what they do in the meeting. So we have the primary services, the related services. So the child must have special education and related services. So what is special education? It's specially designed instruction that meets the unique needs of a child with a disability. That instruction can occur in the general ed setting or in a special ed setting. Related services, there are a lot of related services. We're talking about transportation, talking about speech and language, audiology, OT, counseling, orientation and mobility. There is a long list of different related services that a child can receive. I thought I had another slide there. Moving on to FBA. So if this is something that's not included in every IEP, but if behavior is an area of need, you may want to consider an FBA, which then leads to a BIP. An FBA is a functional behavioral assessment, and the goal is to determine the function of a behavior. So, if there is a behavior that is constantly occurring over a period of time, and the school keeps telling you that so-and-so keeps doing this and this and this, well, what is the school doing about it? They need to collect the data in an FBA and figure out why this behavior is occurring. And then we come back and do a BIP or a behavior intervention plan. So you're going to target that unwanted behavior and replace it with something that is appropriate. Moving on. So with placement, there is a continuum of services. There are the regular gen ed classes, special ed classes, special schools, private schools, home instruction. It kind of builds and becomes more restrictive. One thing that we see a lot in IEP meetings is if a parent is talking about their child who may need one-to-one assistance, I often hear teachers say, well, that's too restrictive. We need to think about the LRE. One-to-one does not necessarily mean it's more restrictive. You can have one-to-one in a regular gen ed classroom. You can have it in a special ed classroom. Now, if it's one teacher, one student in a special ed classroom, that's a little more restrictive than if it's going to be in a gen ed classroom. This is what the top portion is, the placement continuum options. And really everything needs to be considered or explained to you at least, and then they select. There's the rationale and the proposed school placement.
And again, as Bridget was saying, you don't talk about placement when you're talking about goals. So the goals will drive the placement, but you don't write goals in order to fit a certain placement. So that's part of the reason why you could cover the IEP meeting in a specific order, is because you don't talk about the placement first. You talk about the placement after you've talked about everything else.
Special transportation, the team needs to decide if the student requires this to receive FAPE. So some of the things to consider: does the student need to be met? What accommodations need to be in place? School buses don't have seatbelts. Does your child need a seatbelt? The healthcare plan, if they have a healthcare plan, should be on the school bus, especially if your child has an EpiPen. This is something that I saw recently. It's very important. And something that you may not consider: air conditioning. Not all school buses have them. What if the school bus breaks down and your child has difficulty regulating their body temperature? If it's in their IEP, then they need to make sure it's happening. And then another thing to consider is where your student is being dropped off. Are they being dropped off at the same point as everyone else? Do you need closest access? Because there's a mobility issue and we need to make sure the student's getting right to their home in the best way possible. Well, not best, the most appropriate way possible, because while we all want what is best for your child, you're not legally entitled to that. You're legally entitled to what is appropriate. Oh, there And we're moving on to ESY, extended school year. So I included these regulations because I see this quite often, and where schools will limit extended school year to just the summertime. Extended school year can be anytime during the year. It can be over breaks, it can be after school, it can be before school. It's really, the team has to determine if a student requires this in order to receive FAPE, because the benefits of a child with a disability gains during the regular school year will be jeopardized if they aren't provided with these services. So this is something that I like to point out, because I don't think parents always know that it is a possibility. And I think coming off of COVID, Fairfax County had their COVID recovery and things like that. We want to make sure that we're not seeing any regression. We want to keep things going in a positive, making progress, right?
Something to keep in mind with ESY also is that Fairfax County has a long winter break. We have a 2-week winter break. Well, if your child is going to have major regression over that 2-week winter break, then you need to be talking about extended school year services during winter break. Also, if your child needs more extended school year than, let's say, the 6-week program that is proposed by the school, because in those last 4 weeks or whatever the numbers are in my head, of summer, they're going to regress, you need to address that in your meeting as well. It doesn't have to be limited to a certain amount of time.
Absolutely, and that gets on the bottom portion of the screen. It may not limit extended school year to particular categories of disability, limit the type, amount, or duration of the services, or limit to only the summer. It's really important to know. And we're going down the tabs. The consent page. Do not sign anything at the meeting. It's okay to take the copy home to review. I've been in meetings where schools are very eager for parents to sign and want parents to sign immediately in the meeting, because it makes their lives easier. I remember as a teacher, I really didn't want to have to hunt down parents to find out if there were issues or if they just misplaced the papers. Please take it home, review it. You have options. You don't have to provide full consent for the full implementation of the IEP. You can not provide consent, and you can give a partial consent, meaning that you agree to some portions of the IEP, but there are some things you don't agree upon. That's really important to know, and especially because there is not a section on that page. They don't even give you that as an option, but it is an option. It's really important to know.
The consent page will list, I agree, I disagree. And there is no line that says, I partially agree, and you have the right to partial consent. So you have to handwrite in exactly what you're consenting to and not consenting to.
And this is what it looks like. Again, just as Michelle said, there's the I agree, I do not agree. Underneath that, if you partially agree, write it in. So after the meeting, you should get an updated copy of the IEP proposal. If it's something that is truly a collaborative process and you are working together, everything's going great, you're making different changes in the meeting, they need to get you that copy, that updated copy. And it should be within a reasonable period of time after the meeting, not to exceed 10 calendar days. You will also be given the prior written notice, or the PWN. If a request is made during the meeting, it really needs to be documented on this. It needs to be considered. And if FCPS refuses to do a request, so if you say, I really think, Susie requires ESY, well, and then the team says, oh, we don't think she needs that. In the meeting, you need to say, can you please document it on the PWN that we requested it and FCPS denied? They do not like to refuse or deny. So oftentimes you may get them, oh, we didn't say that. So then talk about it some more. Make sure it's documented accurately though. Also during the meeting, again, we talked about the different ways of measuring goals. Sometimes there's rubrics. Sometimes they talk about work samples that they've reviewed. Ask for copies. You should have copies, especially too, if it's a checklist or something, you can use it and reinforce at home. We really want to see that, that connection from home and school. If the meeting is not going well, there's lots of things. Again, there are options. I don't want you to ever feel like you are stuck with something. Take a break. You can take a break in the middle of a meeting. If it's getting heated or you're getting frustrated, you can walk away and regroup. That's okay. A state complaint, that's when the school has violated the law. I can tell you that in Virginia, make lots of state complaints. Don't always see something happen from that, but it is a possibility. And school districts don't like having state complaints against them. Mediation, again, mediation doesn't usually go in favor of the parents, but it is an option. And due process. This is if a student is denied FAPE. And due process is a very long, complicated process, and something that's really important to know. If it's something that you want cleared up right away, due process is probably not the best option for you. It's something that you want to achieve through the IEP meeting. Clicking, there we go. And the best kept secret, this is what Michelle called it, which I really liked, which is an IEE. This is an independent educational evaluation. Parents don't know that you have this option. If the school completes an evaluation, you simply just have to say that you don't agree with it. You can disagree with a psychological, occupational therapy, speech language, any evaluation, ATS even. The school district will then have to pay for a private evaluator to complete assessments. They're not going to do the same exact assessments that were done by the school. There are certain standardized measures where you can't complete an assessment within a certain period of time, but they'll take a look at the same areas. The school provides you a list of different providers, but you have the ability to choose someone else who meets the criteria of an evaluator.
And the school system will also put a financial cap on how much they will cover towards a private assessment. I know I am not a lawyer, nor is Bridget, but there are questions about the legality of that happening. But just know that that's the way the process works right now. So if you are using someone who's on their list of providers, then those providers are aware of the fee cap. If it's someone who is not on their list, you would want to let them know about it and discuss it with them as well.
Absolutely. And this is something our firm, the attorneys in our firm, not me, I helped do with, do some of the background work, but have made a lot of different, we had a successful state complaint with Loudoun County, their fee caps. The fees really should be in line with the going rate in the area. And they are not in any district. Fairfax County recently increased some of their amounts, but it still does not cover what the going rate is in the area. It's pretty awful. But I know our firm, we've been doing a lot of requesting waivers to the fee caps and state complaints, and hopefully we continue to see some positive things come out of that. Questions?
And Bridget, yes, we have a long list of questions.
Oh, yay.
So do you want to just put up on the screen briefly your slide about just your closing?
Yeah, of course. Yep. Lots of final thoughts. Yep. Let me go get past that. Yeah, get to. So again, here's my information. I work with Belkowitz. That's our website and information, and please email me. I'm typically pretty prompt. I get anxious with emails in my inbox, so I like to go through them. any questions, I'm happy to help.
Yep, I have a long list of questions that people have sent in for us, and I apologize for my dog in the background. So Bridget has a baby and I have a dog. We have many, many questions. Let me see. First of all, Bridget, are you on a hard time stop of 9 o'clock?
No,
Okay.
Nora
Okay.
is asleep, and I think Tim has it handled.
Okay.
Find out later.
Okay, we're trying not to go too far over, but we do have a lot of questions that would be great if we can kind of plow through a bunch of them.
Yeah.
If you want to take down your screen share at some point.
Oh,
But
sorry.
but you're good for now. Make sure that stays up. That's important contact information. All right.
Should I just let me know when to stop sharing?
All right. Maybe just give it another minute and then go ahead and take that off. Okay, let's see. I'm just trying to see if there's repetitions in them, but I may just sort of roughly go down the list. If IEP goals are not being executed or followed or worked on, what are parent and students' rights regarding that? You know, for example, parents find out that the kid has a goal that was never worked on.
Yikes. That's a significant problem. I would first try to address it with the school and through an IEP meeting and ask lots of questions. This is a legal document that is required to follow. And if they're not doing this, then they're not providing the student with a free, appropriate public education. Yeah, that could be a due process issue.
Yep, absolutely. Also, some of these questions that are coming in are questions that do come up in our SEPTA Facebook groups. And our Facebook group is really active in terms of parents asking questions and getting really solid answers from lots of other parents too. So if we don't get to your question, or if you have additional questions, please sign up and join our Facebook group and throw your questions out to other parents. I think the other parents are a fantastic resource for you too. All right, a question. Can we invite an FCPS ABA coach to the IEP meeting, especially if they were the child's private BCBA within the past year?
Absolutely. I would definitely talk to that person, because I can imagine sometimes we don't want to put them in an awkward position too. I can imagine that they might get pushback possibly if they're advocating for one thing and the other school-based members of the IEP team are pushing something else. That's just something to consider. I would definitely have a conversation with that person to see if they're comfortable with that.
Absolutely. Another question that came in: why can't parents jointly complete the IEP sharing in the writing? I'm not sure that I fully understand that question. So if you sent that one in, please go ahead in the chat and elaborate a little bit on it. Another one: there was a full list of other people to consider bringing to IEP meetings. One of them included a dyslexia specialist. Are these other members available through FCPS, or do we have to find and hire someone to bring with us? Great question. And one piece that I said to Bridget, please include a list of all the people who can potentially come, because you don't know that these people exist within the system until someone tells you that they exist, and schools aren't always forthcoming about that. So you want to talk a little bit more about, you know, for the example of dyslexia specialist, or you want me to jump in with that?
Sure. I think you did a great job. Yeah, there are so many people in the county that are there are dyslexia specialists. You really shouldn't have to pay out of pocket for someone to come and speak to this. There should be someone who can speak to that. I've worked with different ones in the county, and yeah, very helpful.
And if you want, you can take down your screen share at this point here too.
Okay.
But yes, so there are high incidence disability specialists and low incidence disability specialists. Those are all available on the FCPS website. And their contact information is up there. High incidence are things like dyslexia, for example. It occurs more often, as opposed to low incidence, which are disabilities that don't happen as frequently. But yes, you can reach out to them. You can invite anybody from central office or higher administration to come. You can bring your next door neighbor. You can bring your best friend. You can, I always say to bring somebody, don't go to a meeting alone. Bring another parent who has a kid who has an IEP, just so there's someone else listening besides yourself. We're looking to transition from having learning disability to other health impairment. So that's talking about your area of eligibility. Once we get a formal ADHD diagnosis, what is required and how do services change? I mean, one thing to be aware of is that you can have multiple areas of eligibility, for starters. So you might not have to or even want to drop one area of eligibility to add another one.
Right. And as far as the criteria, I would recommend FCPS has their criteria worksheets. They refer to them as the BCD, the basis for committee decision. And that gives you a really great breakdown of exactly what they're looking for. Two, I consider that the services follow the child, not the eligibility category. A student who is under learning disabilities can receive, services that are nothing to do with academics, or a student who is OHI with ADHD can still get reading goals. So that's something to consider too.
Bridget, would you also actually screen share and put up your list of your second to last slide about your top tips?
Yeah.
Okay, while we're answering some of these questions too.
Michelle, I just want to call attention to the chat. There was a clarification on that earlier question you'd asked for one for.
Thank you. Yes, let me peek and see. Oh, that's okay. Asking about editing, right, and writing on the IEP. Okay, so the question I believe then is about how the actual document gets written, and that somebody from FCPS will be sitting there on their computer with a big projector screen typing down what's said in the meeting. And interestingly, different things get captured by whomever is taking those notes. And there will sometimes be things that are said that don't end up in the document, particularly in the plot page.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one more reason: do not sign at the meeting. Do not sign at the meeting. Do not sign at the meeting. Hopefully y'all got that message, right? Don't sign at the meeting. Bring the draft home, read through that plop. If there are important things that were discussed that did not make it into the plop, then you need to write back to the team and ask that be inserted and included in the plop or wherever it was. You can't change and add things that didn't happen, or points that you forgot to make. But if something was said that was not included in there, if it's not written down, it's as if it wasn't said at all. It would be nice if technology allowed us to share, but they don't get to document share that stuff. The plop is the present level of performance. Let's see. An IEP meeting is adjourned for an evaluation. What is a reasonable time for the school to complete the IEP? So I'm thinking for that type of situation, you're having the IEP meeting and they decide, we need more information before we can write these goals. What's a reasonable time, Bridget, for doing that extra evaluation and then coming back to the IEP table?
That's a good question. I mean, you want to come back as soon as possible to wrap it up. I mean, I would not say any more than 30 days. I wouldn't go any more than that. That would be pretty long.
All right. What do you do with goals if there's an obvious need but no data due to a student's communication disorder impacting their ability to participate? So you're not getting data because you can't get data.
That's a good question. I think in an instance like that too, it seems like the communication would be the biggest issue. So I would really focus on that, because a lot of times with our students who have communication issues, you're going to see the increase in behaviors. It really leads to a lot of other things. I don't know if I'm answering the question the best, but I would focus on the communication piece first before moving on to anything else.
Mm-hmm. If a child has difficulties accessing all curriculum, should they have goals in all academic areas? I think that question is also kind of going to, are your goals writing your curriculum? And the answer is no. Do you want to talk a little bit more about sort of skills versus curriculum?
Yeah, so again, this is based on the unique needs of the child. It's an IEP, it's individualized. So a student, may be working, the class may be, or it might be on geometry, but the kid's doing great in geometry, but is still having difficulty with calculation, with multiplication or something like that. It really needs to be focused on the needs of the kiddo and not what the curriculum is.
Okay. This is an interesting one about timing, because there are regulations about how often you have to have IEP meetings, for example. So my child has always had an IEP meeting near the end of the school year, but since we had an IEP review postponed, the meeting was now called at the beginning of the school year. How do I adjust the time for the school year? And is there a better timing for when to be having your IEP meetings?
You can request an IEP meeting whenever you want. I think the person may be just talking about the annual IEP. You can always request the meeting. The annual IEP, as far as if you want to change when that's occurring, so it can be changed earlier, to be made earlier if you're making significant changes to the IEP. If a student has mastered lots of goals and you're pretty much going to be rewriting the IEP if you're updating things, then you can hold that annual.
Something else too is the idea that if your child achieves all their goals, it doesn't mean, okay, we're done with having an IEP. It means it's time for new goals.
Right. And I would be hesitant sometimes if a student masters it in one quarter. I guess it always depends on the situation, but I typically would like to see a student has mastered it to, a couple of quarters in a row to ensure it before we would, again, that would be an addendum. You would meet again and make some changes. Two, if the student is not making progress, you get those progress reports and you're seeing the twos. They should be giving you an interim report, and you may need to get back together as a team and make it more attainable.
And are there advantages to having your IEP meeting at a certain time during the school year from the teacher perspective?
I know when I did not like having them. I think before and winter break, brutal. During, I think I would not want to have it during SOLs. If your child is going to be taking an SOL, you want to make sure you are getting that in beforehand in case there are any testing accommodations that the child needs.
Great. What is an example of a decoding goal that you would suggest for a non-speaking student? I feel like this is a pop quiz question. Decoding goals for non-speaking students.
I would work. I mean, the communication piece is huge. I think there would need to be some significant speech and language goals associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
Really working on the mode of a communication, whatever is being used there.
Okay.
Sorry, I am answering that question.
Yeah, I think it's a very narrow and specific population, and there's not a lot of expertise in FCPS about teaching decoding to non-speaking students.
Yeah, and it's a lot of these are great questions. It's hard to know without more information and the context.
Yep. Let's see. How do you respond when you know that your child needs a curriculum that is in between VAP and Gen Ed? There's all the paperwork about is your child on VAP, but is your child not VAP? And would you also just share what VAP stands for?
oh, do I remember what it stands for?
Virginia
Alternative
assessment.
Yeah, so, oh, sorry, I'm getting lots of text.
I feel like I should know that, but yeah.
So I would, so there is a specific criteria for VAP. And a lot of times the schools like to tie in IQ with that. But it also, there's sorry, I'm trying to word this. The adaptive skills is a piece to that too. So while your child may have difficulty with the general curriculum, if your child is able to put their clothes on, is able to, to do all of those adaptive skills, then they really should be taking the SOL.
Got it. Thank you.
And two, I know parents get really overwhelmed with the SOL. One thing that I heard a lot as a teacher that really broke my heart is the kids would, and because I did third grade most of the time, so it's their first year. It's really kind of like a practice that for third grade. Kids will not have to repeat the grade if they fail an SOL. Please don't put that pressure on your child. But two, parents can always opt out. That's always an option.
Yep, that's an important one for folks to hear, is that if you want to, you can opt your child out of SOLs. The only time that the SOLs really count is when you get into high school courses, or courses even if they take them in middle school that are counting towards high school, certain math or foreign language. Then they need to pass the SOLs to get what are called verified credits. But prior to that, you don't have to take SOLs. You can always exempt your child from them. In our household, to try to reduce the angst about them, we used to call them the silly old learning tests. And I would tell my kids that it was a test for the school to measure whether or not the teachers taught you everything that was on the test. So I really tried to take the pressure off of my kids for the SOLs.
Yeah,
Right,
and even if a student doesn't pass SOLs in high school, there are different alternative options. There are different assessments like the WorkKeys business test. There's locally awarded credits, so there are options.
Hold on, I'm just putting in here again the link. Whoops. Amanda, if you would be able to put into the chat again the link for the questions because we're collecting the questions on a spreadsheet, and when people put them in the chat, we just can't keep track of them all.
The link to the form. Yeah.
Yes, please. Thanks. Question about assessments. Which part of the KTEA tests auditory processing? So the KTEA, the Kaufman Test of Educational Assessment, I don't remember what it stands for.
Educational achievement.
Thank you, is an achievement test. So it's
Yes.
actually not looking at processing. Processing is an underlying ability that comes out more in the psychological testing. That the achievement test is looking at how your child performs on certain sort of academic subjects per se, or academic skills. And those processing deficits would get in the way or not get in the way of their ability to achieve.
Right. And but as far as, like if a student has poor auditory processing, that's going to affect their achievement in different areas. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, if a child has a hard time with auditory processing, was the question, they're potentially going to have a hard time with nonsense words, which are words that follow the rules of phonics but are not actual real words. Or they might have a hard time with spelling, for example. Let's see, we have a calculator accommodation for 4th grade, but we're struggling as to whether it's important to go without it on classroom tests while learning these basic math facts.
If a student is using it on assessment, I would strongly encourage to be using it with their classwork so that they're comfortable using it. And also, something to consider, students need instruction on how to use calculators, especially as they get into those older grades and the more complicated calculators. That's something to consider. You could have a goal on how to use the calculator. That's another option. Again, it's individualized.
Yep. And I mean, I would, as a former teacher too, I would always encourage kids to try to get their math facts automatic, but if they are unable to, that's what the accommodation is for.
Right. And if they want to try and then check it with the calculator when they're done. Yeah.
Yep. This was a good question. The language of using an explicit systematic phonics instruction, is that a way of saying Orton Gillingham without saying Orton Gillingham? Yes.
No. Yes. Dyslexia, it cannot, emphasize that enough.
Yeah.
OG, and OG is a method. It's not a program. So there are different programs that use that methodology. I think FCPS right now, they're offering OG training, but it is the Fairfax sized OG training to be, there are different levels of being certified in OG. It's pretty intense.
But it's worth asking at your IEP meeting, or even including in the IEP document itself, that the person working on reading, decoding skills is trained in a systematic, explicit, multisensory.
Multisensory, yes, that's another important piece.
Cumulative. Let's see. What do you do if you ask for an IEP and they decided the child didn't need service? That's going to really go more into local screening and whether or not the child was found eligible.
And the school, they cannot, they can't just stop services without your permission. That's important to know too.
Absolutely, you have to sign permission. So let's say that your kid gets older and the school says, we think that they've made great progress, we don't think they need services anymore, or if there's things in the IEP that you don't agree to, again, that goes back to partial consent. And so if you don't want to drop services, then you do not sign consent to drop services. And then something called stay put goes into place, which is where the previous IEP remains the IEP, even if it expired, technically.
I get a lot, unfortunately, with those related services, speech, OT, PT.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And if you're looking to add additional services to the IEP, you might end up going back to reevaluation, where you take a look and see if additional services are being required, and then doing more testing and potentially doing that IEE, that independent evaluation. Can we share a list of advocates for hire? So my best suggestion for you on that is also to, besides Bridget, in addition to that, go to our Facebook group, and you can just do a search on advocate, and that question has come up many, many times. And the most important piece from a parent perspective is to work with somebody who you're comfortable with, for sure. I'm getting an IEE next month. What do I do to ensure that we have a meeting before the end of the year?
I have a lot more questions with that. So
Yeah.
if the actual, so the testing, it takes a while, and there have been just huge wait lists for IEE providers. If it's, it's February now, if they're able to get the IEE completed, they should be able to get it in by the end of the year. Sometimes the providers take a while with writing the reports, but I would just emphasize that you want to get it done.
Yeah. And also there are, they refer to it as summer clinic, but there are services in the summer to get IEPs written. It won't necessarily be your school-based team, but there are people who work through the summer. So if you don't finish up an IEP during the school year, you can work on it in the summertime. Another question about IEEs is, can you request one at any time, or does it have to occur immediately after FCPS's testing? And I actually just, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is something that has been, we've had a lot of discussion in our firm, as far as, because we have had different districts say that it's past the time limit. It's over 2 years and you can't request it. I'm getting texts that to check out letter to boss is a good thing to check into. But
Yes.
we've also had IEs when the school districts failed to do the assessments.
Yep, and I can just share from personal example. My kiddo was evaluated last June. I just put in for an IEE because there were things that weren't covered on it, and I just had it approved, and it's February. So, that's many months, 8 months after the assessment was done. So it does not have to be immediately after testing, and you will not find that information on the FCPS website.
No.
So you need to just Google IEE, but it is right.
We have one of our attorneys says there is no time limit. I know really working with an issue right now in Loudon because they really like to put that limit of 2 years on. But again, I'm not an attorney. We have great attorneys at Belkowitz that you can email and ask. And too, I wanted to say we have another advocate, Sharon Trove, who's just phenomenal.
An interesting line, a couple more questions and then we're all done. So thank you for those of you who are hanging in there with this. These are really great questions. A line that is frequently said at IEP meetings is, a one-to-one aid in a gen ed classroom is more restrictive than a self-contained classroom. I can repeat that if you want.
Yeah, no, that's not true.
Can you give any more information as to why, so that a parent has something to kind of hang a hat on coming back to that?
Michelle, I'm happy to chime in if you want on this, because these are very legal questions.
Yes, they are, but I don't want to put you in that position.
I know.
So, Bridget, you can stop your screen share too.
Okay, great.
Yes, so school districts will often say that having an aid is more restrictive. But the purpose of the law, which doesn't say inclusion, but it's LRE, least restrictive environment. So the least restrictive environment is that your child would attend school and attend classes with non-disabled peers that they would otherwise attend school with if they did not have a disability. So if you look at it like that, your child is better off in a gen ed classroom with non-disabled peers that they would otherwise be attending school with if they didn't have a disability. Now, that being said, I'll be perfectly honest, there are cases where, it might be very restrictive to have an aid in a gen ed environment. For instance, if you had a student who was the condition formerly known as Asperger's, and they were maybe in high school and they had an aid following them, it could inhibit their ability to socialize.
So it's going to depend on the situation.
Yes, and you also have to consider the ultimate goal of an IEP under IDEA, which is to make the person as independent adult as possible. So if you are going to give them an aid, question is, how do you ensure that they're not going to become dependent upon an aid, for the rest of their lives? So those are things to consider. So certainly I believe there are cases that a child really benefits from the use of an aid, or the help of an aid, and maybe in a few years you can sort of transition away from that. But I don't agree with the statement that it is more restrictive than putting the child in a self-contained classroom with 100% special ed students.
I agree. All right, we're down to the last couple questions here, Bridget. So thank you for hanging in there with us. If my child is in quarantine for an extended period of time, so this is sort of treading on new grounds, should services be given to my child at home? Hold on, let me just read the rest of the question to myself first. Okay, They're saying that a kiddo, the question is, if a child is at home in quarantine because they're like on pause or whatever have you from FCPS, should they be getting their services, for example, their related services with a special ed teacher? I believe the answer to that is yes, they should. If I am remembering correctly from things that I've been hearing from the special ed office, is that your child still should be getting those services remotely. Bridget, do you have any additional information? Are you up to the latest and greatest from SCPS on that?
I said to Sherry.
Yeah, these are really tough questions because COVID is such an evolving area. So usually the law says that any change in placement of greater than 10 days would trigger, receipt of services. But COVID has changed how we look at all these things. So I certainly would advocate for, if your child is not suffering from COVID symptoms and can access an education, I would certainly be advocating for virtual services for them. And certainly you can ask for recovery or compensatory services for the time that they have missed. It really depends on the situation, in my opinion.
And I actually also just got some additional information from Amanda, our vice president, who said that FCPS is absolutely doing telehealth related services. There's a consent form you need to sign. So if it's not being offered to you, then you should request it. But yes, your child should absolutely be getting their related services while they're at home.
Yes, and if they are home because they're ill or they're home for an extended period of time, then they can apply for homebound services.
Right, but with this quarantining from COVID, they are doing telehealth for it. Absolutely. Yeah. And our last question that we have here, I think that you kind of answered in your whole presentation, Bridget, because you covered so much information in a relatively short time. The question is, reviewing the law is a really big tip to overcome. Is there a list of top items to know? And I think that you really touched on the parental rights that are really important. Is there anything else that came to your mind, Bridget, that's really super important to know?
Again, these are all really great questions, and yeah, I mean, I could go on for days about IEP meetings. You can ask my husband. I have. Sherry, is there anything else that you can think of? I mean, they're all very important.
They're all so important. I mean, I guess you just have to, there's an inherent imbalance of power because school systems do IEP meetings every day and they're familiar with the process. They know all the acronyms, the abbreviations, they know what's available. And parents, we don't. I'm a special ed attorney, but I started as a parent and I didn't know what was available. I didn't know how to access it. I didn't know what to ask for. So the most important thing is to educate yourself. And that's why it's important to join SEPTA and to access these programs that SEPTA offers so you can educate yourself, because that's your job. Nobody should ever fault you for advocating for your child. And so you need to advocate for your child. And the best way to do that is to educate yourself. And you should feel free to ask questions at these meetings. And like Bridget emphasized, it's just not appropriate to sign at the end of the meeting. You need to really, it's like a contract that you need to take home and read and make sure you understand it. It is complicated. It's a complicated system, but it makes a huge difference in the outcome for your child. So I really encourage you to educate yourself and to take time and understand what you're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, as popped up in the chat, you are your child's best advocate. So important. Anytime you don't understand something, I mean, tonight we tried to really explain all the different acronyms that we were using, but when those acronyms are being thrown around at the meetings, it's okay to interrupt and say, excuse me, what does that mean? Anything that you don't understand, you stop and ask about. And if there wasn't enough time allotted in the IEP meeting to get through everything. That does not mean the team has to now rush to get through everything in the meeting. It means that you need to have another meeting. And if it
trust your instincts, trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, then you need to ask about it. And I mean, we've had situations where they said the child is not doing well in speech, so we're going to discontinue speech. Well, that to me, that is counterintuitive. I would like you to increase speech. So you have to really look at it like, you want to trust the school staff implicitly because you trust them every day with your child, but you are entitled to ask questions and find out what makes sense. And yeah, so I think, educate yourself, join SEPTA, join the conversation, and learn how to best advocate.
Yep. And Bridget put together a wonderful handout that we will send out. We have all your email from the registration forms, so we will send that out to you all. It has links for lots of different handbooks and other resources. We also have many of them on our SEPTA website as well. But like Bridget mentioned at the beginning, the purple book, and I brought for my show and tell, there are so many guidebooks that are available to you. So the purple book is all the rules. Like if you think your
regulations have not been updated, though, I will tell you,
yes,
it doesn't have in there the update about the draft IEPs.
Oops. This
The
one,
link that I have will take you to the updated stuff.
excellent, thank you. I need to get an updated one printed out. But this is a great one right here, the Special Education Handbook for Parents. It's relatively new and it's parent friendly. There's a twice exceptional handbook. Whoops, there we go. And there's even one on how to solve disputes, although I hope you never have to use this one. And there's lots and lots of resources out there. So so please, use them and ask questions.
And Bridget gave her email address. And so if you have any follow-up questions, I'm sure she'll be happy to answer.
Yep. Amanda, I see you have your hand raised too.
Yeah. Hi, I just wanted to, I posted this in the chat a little bit earlier and just wanted to draw attention to it on the recording too for anybody who might be listening in after the fact. If your student is on the VAP track, the Virginia Alternative Assessment Program track, the VAP is new this year. In all previous years, it has been a portfolio-based assessment where teachers would gather data over the course of the year and then submit it to VDOE and they would assess and get back to you. This year, it is going to be a computerized, standardized assessment. There are a boatload of accommodations for it. You should be being contacted by your case managers to get those accommodations in place, since this wasn't a part of last year's IEP process. So if you haven't, feel free to reach out to them and ask, inquire about that. And I will also make sure to post again the link. There are 2 links on VDOE's VAP website for parents. One is an introduction video for parents, and the other is an FAQ document for parents. So if that applies to you and your families, please go check those resources out because this whole process is new this year.
And Amanda, thank you so much for speaking up about that and sharing that information. Amanda was actually on a statewide committee being a parent representative. So, if you're a parent and you're saying, oh my gosh, how do these people know all this stuff? It's a learning curve, but there have been volunteer opportunities, and there are still volunteer opportunities if you want to get more involved and you want to learn more as well. It feels overwhelming and it feels like a foreign language, but dive in and join us because the water's warm and we enjoy each other's company and
we're really friendly.
We're doing here.
And we bring good snacks.
And when we're in person, we have good snacks. All right. Bridget, we'll chat offline about the possibility of getting slides sent out to folks in addition to having them up on our YouTube, because there was so much wonderful information in your slides. They were fantastically helpful. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you staying late with us tonight. I know that you have a 4-month-old, and so you're probably very sleep deprived, and so we appreciate you staying up for us tonight. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate you asking me. This is a great opportunity, and thank you for everybody who attended and for your patience with me. This was my first big presentation. Made it a little easier just talking to my computer instead of a room full of people. But I appreciate it. Please, any other questions, don't hesitate to email me.
And again, thank you also. If you are not a member of SEPTA, please feel free, please join SEPTA. Go to our website and there will be links there to get that done. And if you're a FCPS staff member, then we offer super discounted staff rate of $6. And if you want to be a member, but the $20 is out of reach for you right now, please message us and we are happy to work something out and adjust your rate so that we can have everybody included and not unincluded for financial need. So thank you again. You're getting tons of thank yous coming into the chat, Bridget. So thank you so much.
Best IEP presentation. Yay.
It was fantastic. And everybody have a wonderful night. You wouldn't know it was our first presentation. It was great. Thank you all for coming out and joining us and sticking around to the end. Really appreciate that. And we'll see you on Facebook and hopefully at our next meeting. And nominate your staff members for our awards. Don't forget. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good night.